we've talked a lot today through the day about international music, and there's been a lot of conversation about local music. What role do you see? And there is this glocalization word as well. But what role do you see of local Asian music being in the music ecosystem?
Well, I think you mentioned it was very interesting today. Is that we've talked a lot about the swear jar and the tea name. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention it.
By the way, the only reason we have the swear jar is I've got nothing against that. It's just so people don't, just people wear other stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's just such amazing I mean, that is just the most amazing headline ever. But it was, let's get people to talk about other things and plant trees.
Absolutely, but I think this is interesting because a lot of the conversation, and I think the previous panel was, we only spoke about international artists. Like 90% of the talk was about top international artists. Which is great, but actually, I think that music starts locally. It has always been local. It's always been something that has been deeply rooted in the music ecosystem. And I would say the fact that superstars are international English-speaking artists, my gut sense is it's an anomaly. It's an anomaly that has been driven by the fact that the economics of running a music business for decades was driven by high production costs. So basically it was easier to develop one big artist and try to break it internationally. And that's just how the economics works. And what's very interesting to look at, and it's when you look at how the music industry worked back in the days, it was essentially relying on physical sales and radio and TV. Physical sales, radio, TV were all eminently local relationships. So you had to have powerful ties with local media outlet, local radio station, local retailers, so that you can have the best spot in the shop, of the best spot in the playlist, or the best spot on TV. And so, of course, that has created a bottleneck for artists to be showcased and to have more visibility through media and through retail. And what digital has happened is that today, the media, it's YouTube, it's TikTok, it's Instagram. The retailers, it's Spotify, it's Apple Music, it's YouTube Music. So. And those companies are not local anymore. Those are international major players that are, ironically, and greatly for the market, has massively helped in the uprising of the local music ecosystem. And I think that's very interesting because platforms, media has gone global, and that has helped music going back to local. And I think this is probably one of the most interesting findings that we've seen over the last 10 years. It's digital has helped the development of the local music industry. It has lowered the barrier to entry for creating great music. And today you do not need to spend a month in a studio with highly paid musicians to actually create a great album. You actually can do it on your own. I mean, Ed Sheeran started on TuneCore, and when I was seeing the show, he's alone on stage. It was one guitar, one loop box, and that's it. Did he need a big studio to do that? No. So that has also contributed to the rising of domestic artists, and so the role that we have played in that area was giving the tools, giving the access to those global platforms. By better monetizing music, redirecting royalty generation back into local artists so that it can create a positive circle, a positive retroaction loop that has brought back value where it belongs, which is local. So sorry for the long answer to your question, but your question is what's the role of local music? I think it has the most important role in today's music industry and probably in the future 10 years of the music industry, because this is where value is going to be created. This is where the future stars are going to emerge from, and I think this is very exciting.
And then what role is Believe playing, and other people in the industry, what role are you playing in growing local?
Well, so as I was saying, the getting on platforms, it's I would say it's the key element to monetizing, to getting your music heard, and again, back in the days, you had editors or radio editors that are essentially deciding what would be going into your ears. Now everybody has its tiny radio in his pocket or his tiny TV show, a tiny TV program that is precisely tailored exactly for you. So our job is to navigate in that space, better leverage tools such as discovery tools, algorithm-based recommendation that will help us and help the artists get into the right ears, so that instead of and being a lot more precise, targeting the audience for each artist. So the music industry, thanks to digital, thanks to the event of social media, the event of streaming, has become a lot more diverse. And our role is to provide the tools to navigate this world and to give the artists and creators the ability to target better the audience, monetize it, and in turn make more money so that they can create even more content and develop further.
So we talked about the role of local music in this part of the world. We talked about how Believe and other organizations are helping to grow it. What role then does Asia play in the rest of the world?
I think what's interesting is that that's one thing that you said it earlier, we've been very, very strong believers, pun intended, of Asia and Asian music. We've started developing in Asia 11 years ago, when very, very few people actually started investing massively. Not saying that nobody was present. Of course, some companies were present, but I would say most of the majors were focused on essentially exporting their international artists because that's what the economics of the time dictated. And so what we choose to do is to really focus on domestic artists. So what we saw is that by investing on local content, we've seen a lot of artists developing from all genres of music, and I think people vastly underestimate how rich and diverse is music creation and production in each and every country. I think it's fascinating to see how much genres of music and how much local it is. Sometimes hyper local. It's super regional, and so we've been focusing a lot on this. And what's interesting is that as the music ecosystem gets bigger, the local music ecosystem gets bigger. There's more players. The players are getting more. The segment is professionalizing a lot more, which means that it attracts more artists. It attracts more entrepreneurs in that sector. And what happens at the end is that local music becomes start to rival in terms of quality of production with some of, I would say, international standards. And so when you look now at the charts in every single country in Asia Pacific, half of the chart is usually trusted by domestic artists, if not more. Some countries are eminently domestic. And so it's very important. It's very important to see how those artists are progressing. The quality of the production is progressing. Asia as a whole, we think, is going to become the #1 music market in the world within the next 10 years, which means that Asia is going to become more and more influential on the global stage. I think we spoke a lot about Korea, of course, and K-pop, and how they deliberately tailored a model to capture the world's opportunity. but I think that's gonna become even more true over the future. I think there was a few interesting articles this year. Luminate demonstrated that the domination of English music in the global charts has been challenged a lot, moving from, I think you remember the numbers correctly, from 63% to 51%, which means that now nearly half of the global charts are of international, like non-English speaking content, and I think it's gonna get bigger and bigger over time. In local markets, we see exactly the same things. We see the domestic market share growing faster. So I think it's only logical to see Asia emerging as a market leader, not just in terms of size of market itself, but also as an influential production hub. I think it's very interesting to look at what the Thai music is currently, the direction in which it's going, and how it's currently expanding even beyond the borders of Thailand. Some artists are getting popular outside of in Southeast Asia. Some artists are getting very popular in mainland China itself. We see Indonesian artists traveling more. We see Filipino artists traveling more. We see Indian artists that are starting to get super popular in Canada, in Australia, with diasporas, of course, helping a lot. But it's starting to trickle down towards the mainstream population. So I think Asian music is going to become more and more of a prominent source of on the music creation, and I think it wouldn't be surprised if down the road a lot of like the international artists are getting very much influenced by Asian artists and Asian creators.
Very cool. And there's been a lot of conversations today about this word glocalization. What's your definition of, and what's Believe's definition of glocalization?
Is that even a word?
I don't think so, but
yeah. So I think the industry loves to make up new words to explain somewhat of a very basic concept, which is, to me, back to the basics, back to the roots, back to local. I think what's the only thing it means to me, it's another word for diversity. It's a word that essentially replaces having international charts dominated by Anglo-Saxon artists and having the opportunity to see Thai artists, Vietnamese artists, Indian artists, Chinese artists, Latin artists, French artists at the same position as what we see in as like international superstars. So I think this is what that strange word means to me. It's more about increasing diversity and recognizing the diversity of the world's music creation globally, instead of having our eyes only focused on a few big American names.
I mean, this is probably an unfair question, but will Thai music ever take off in China, or will Chinese music ever take off in India, or in the same way that K-pop's been taking over the world?
It's a good question. I'm asking myself a question very regularly, and I would almost tend to say it's the $1 million question. I think there's no reason to think it won't happen. I tend to think that music is not something that exists out of nothing. It's usually rooted in a larger ecosystem. K-pop has been popular because, first, of course, you have a very targeted and intentional action from the Korean government, as well as the Korean music industry, to expand beyond what is a relatively small market. And so in order to create value, sometimes you have to look beyond your borders, and that's what Korea did. But it also came on the back of Korean drama becoming very, very popular across Asia Pacific and sometimes in other territories. It came on the back of Korean technology brands that have started to become more popular as well. It came on the back of Korean cosmetics and fashion going to be on the back of this. So music is not something that is ethereal, that exists outside of the rest of the world. It's connected with the rest. So I would say there's a higher chance for a music phenomenon to happen if it's connected to something else and not just out of nowhere. That's why I'm actually a strong believer that Japan music at some point will probably find a bigger audience outside of Japan, for the reason that I mentioned, because Japan culture is widely loved across like gastronomy, like animation, video games, like everything. There's a very, very strong backing that probably will support this.
So J-pop is coming back?
I think it will, yeah. I think it will. And maybe not J-pop in the popish sense of what is popular right now in Japan. It's probably going to be a different kind of J-pop, the same way that the K-pop that is being listened to worldwide is actually quite different than the Korean pop that is listened in Korea. Yep. And again, I want to maybe bring it back to one key element is that, and I think it's Creator Week, so I think it's important to put back things into context. Every artist, and believe me, every time we meet artists, this always comes back. They all want to go abroad. There's no exceptions. I very rarely see artists that do not have an international ambition. I think the dream is to say, hey, I'm gonna be big in my country, but to some extent, the biggest dream is, hey, am I gonna be a superstar down the road? There's only a very, very small pool of superstars, and that's why they're superstars. If there was a big pool of superstars, then they would not be superstars anymore. So that's kind of the concept. So I think it's the same for K-pop. I think it's the same for international American artists. I think it's the same for any kind of artist, which means that the pool of superstars is small, which means that as an artist to develop internationally, there's only a small fraction of artists that actually make it outside of their home market. It doesn't mean that they're not successful. Again, as I was telling you, we work with a lot of domestic artists. We have more artists in the charts on Spotify in 2023 than any other player in Thailand, in Indonesia, in India, including international artists, including majors. Why? Because domestic artists can be superstars in their own market. And sometimes, wow, it's a great start. Can you make it to becoming an international superstars? Maybe, but the chances are relatively small. And it's normal. So, and again, when you look at K-pop, there's only a few Blackpinks and BTS. But there's thousands of bands in Korea that will never get out of Korea. Does that mean they're not successful? No, they're very successful in their own market. So our core focus is to say, okay, we want diversity at the top. We want diversity. We want an international music consumption that is more representative of what the music industry should look like. But at the same time, let's not forget that the fans are most of the time based locally. They can afford going to concerts in their hometown. They can engage more easily with artists that speak the same language. And I don't think this is going to change ever. So I think that's what's important for me.
Very cool. Now we are out of time, so very quick final question. What does the future look like for Believe?
Wow. Well, I would say keep exactly in the same lines as what we've done over the last 10 years, which means to continue to invest significantly on domestic music, creating more avenues for artists to emerge, demonstrating to the world that great music and amazing music rises at all stages, from TuneCore all the way to DIY platform all the way to top artists. So we want to continue to provide the best service possible, the best access to platforms, to monetization, to accessing audiences to all artists at all stages of development in all local markets. And that's what we're going to be focusing on.
Fantastic. Well, I think we could carry on this conversation for a long time, but we have people on the schedule after us. But we've talked about, it was an interesting insight. We say, whilst media has gone global, music has gone more local, but that's a great opportunity for the artists. There's so much value in local. We talked about data matters, Asia matters, talked about going back to basics, talked about diversity, talked about the need to be connected, talked about how exciting Japan is at the moment as well, so watch out for that. And then the final two words, keep going and keep investing in local. So with that, Sylvain, thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy.